Well, good day everyone and welcome to another edition of CrowCast Tuesday Night Live. And being the pre-season, we had a little technical glitch there which we've overcome as we always do, so we're back into it now and live. And thanks everyone for joining us on Spreaker, Facebook and YouTube. We hope to bring you some entertainment over the next 45 minutes, and of course joining me as per usual, the lovely Nikki. How are you, Nick?
I'm good.
That's good. I don't think I've ever called you the lovely Nikki before.
No, something
you haven't.
going
you
on.
Haven't.
Yeah, I'll try not to make a habit of it. And Mac, how you doing?
Yep, no, pretty good, mate. I was a little bit lost there with Burton gone and no dickheads to call, but the Parklands mob has emerged, so I've got something to aim at.
Oh, look, do you want to know something? My lovely boss, her father is a North Adelaide resident and has been actually on the news promoting against the Crows' plans there in North Adelaide. So you can imagine, as a consequence of that, we've had some discussions.
Yep. No, I actually posted tonight on Twitter, get those NIMBYs to get off their gophers and they go and have a look at it.
Well,
I had a look at it.
They've even got the world famous Andy Thomas in their corner now, which is a bit rude.
Oh,
isn't he a Crows ambassador? Interesting thing though, has her father? When was the last time he actually went?
One of the reasons
to the pool complex.
One of the reasons he's so opposed is because he's a pool regular, and
so wouldn't he like it fixed?
Well, see, the issue is, and we're sort of jumping the gun a little bit, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The issue is, and I think this is probably a problem in the whole process, is that they're afraid that they're going to lose access. So even though Vegas has come out a few times and said, look, it's a public facility and we might be renting a couple of lanes every now and again, but it's a public facility, those opposed are afraid that they're going to lose access. So it comes down to communication. It always does come down to communication with these things. And I think the process itself has been a bit flawed and probably led to a bit of this confusion, notwithstanding the fact that you're always going to get the NIMBYs that just don't want it.
Yeah, well, I used to be a member there, and I stopped going there because it was so decrepit and run down. The change rooms are a thorough disgrace.
Yeah.
And when they talk about, and the Crows talk, they will hire lanes from time to time. Often when I was doing my swimming, I was restricted. I could only use one of two or three lanes because all the rest were booked out by somebody else.
Yeah, schools or what have you. There's a number of things that go on there, and the place is losing money. The place needs money spent on it. I think one of the issues that the pool people have is that they're going to lose a diving board. Well, those diving boards are in a pretty bad state at the moment anyway. So, what are they actually losing? I think a lot of the problem, Mac, is just a lack of communication and a general, Adelaide displeasure, any sort of progress, sort of development. Yeah, exactly right. So anyway,
but it is hypocritical because Sodi, who leads the bunch, he actually says he doesn't want sporting clubs like Adelaide, big conglomerates, using the parkland for exclusive use. But you've got the Adelaide Bowling Club, which is on parklands. You've got the Croquet Club, which most of these North Adelaide members probably people are members of.
Yep.
So it's hypocritical.
100%. There's lots of. I think the Crows being a quote unquote corporate rather than a government funded or community funded or council funded program, is something that they can easily target. But the bottom line is they're not losing anything from the information that we've been given so far. They're not losing anything. They're gaining an upgraded facility, and the ovals remain intact. No fences are going up anywhere, etc., etc., etc. So it just It just frustrates.
I find them very
this town
frustrating.
just frustrates me because there's so much potential in this city, and we need new developments. And this sort of opposition is not just about the Crows; it just turns other investors away.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, the other benefits to the community are that their own council will save a fortune, and on top of that, the O'Connell Street traders will be revived. So it's just good for North Adelaide and Adelaide as a whole. And you've got this group of, and I don't want to be disrespectful, but they were very aged North Adelaide residents. They're closed minds, like one you're talking about, closed minds, and they're trying to stop it. And if the Adelaide City Council don't go ahead with it, they are the most stupid council of all time. But then they've also really proven that they are. So it makes you worry.
Well, without labouring the point too much more, there was a strategic plan put out in 2017 for that aquatic centre, and the estimate was $10 to $14 million needed to be spent on it.
21 now.
Yeah, so the council aren't going to cough up that sort of money. It's going to need some sort of corporate injection to stay viable. And so whether it be the Adelaide Crows building a facility around it, or whether it be some other corporate entity that injects funds into it, you are not going to get $20 million from the council. You're not going to get $20 million from the state government because they've invested in the Marion swimming pool.
Correct.
Where's the money going to come from? Their attendances are down. They lost $700,000 or $800,000 last year. So they're not making any money.
And one of their suggestions was because people from outside, other councils come and use it, and they're saying, well, so the other councils should put their money in. Well, I'm in Marion. We've got 2 swimming pools.
Yeah, exactly.
We already paid for ours. We've got 2. They've got 1.
Look, the bottom line is the place needs to be rejuvenated. It's going to need an injection of funds. The injection of funds isn't going to come from public coffers, you wouldn't think. And so in terms of the people that use that pool regularly, I actually don't know what their opposition is, because the Crows developing around there and updating that facility is the best shot they've got at having a nice place to swim, in my opinion.
100% right. Yeah, 100% right.
Precisely. And Paul C on the chat said, can't the state government step in? No, they don't have that money to do that. It's the only reason the Crows...
Not just that.
And the Crows... Yeah.
They can, on major projects, they can override, but I'm not sure they can in this case with Parklands.
I don't actually think it... I don't think it qualifies as a coming under the state development plan, but I could be wrong on that one. Anyway, look, let's push on. That's got a long way to go.
Yeah, I'm just saying they're my Burton at the moment.
Oh yeah. Look, the other thing that now that we're into the news anyway, let's talk about some AFL news. And one of the things that sparked my interest today was the AFL releasing its salary numbers, and there are 9 players,
9 billionaires,
9 players above $1 million, 2 of them at 1.2. What I found most surprising, well, a couple of things I found surprising, but one of the things I found most surprising was the number of players in that 200 below mark. I actually thought that was quite surprising. You've got, what's that, about 300 odd players on 300 or less, and you've got nearly 200 of them on 200 or less. That's a fair chunk when you're talking about a total of 600 players, 700 players in the system.
And aren't they counting rookies now more than, because they didn't used to count rookies?
They are counting rookies. So it'd be,
because then they're on the main list. So I think you've got that increase that's come into that little pool.
Yeah, but that only accounts for
what we've previously had.
That only accounts for probably 30 odd players, because there's 31 players between 60 and 100, which would pick up your rookies. Your rookies on around about 65, I think. But you've got 166 players on between 100 and 200,000. So they're probably the second year rookies that have been extended, etc., etc. But when you look at the numbers, you've got, what's that, 90, 119, oh, that's a number, 135 players between 500,000 and 900,000. So that's not a huge amount of players.
Well, what it clearly tells you, though, Fiend, that unless you're a regular in the side and regarded as an automatic selection, you're not going to get paid very much by comparison to the other guys. So that means you really got probably two levels of players: the ones that get the good money and the ones that are struggling to get in. And Paholke would be probably in that category if it's in Adelaide, for example. I'd think he'd be a 200 guy for sure.
Oh, probably under 200. Yeah. Look, yeah. I think what it says to me is that there's a bunch of very elite players, and it follows that trend of big money following, certain players. So every year we have one or two players that are targeted with big money. And it seems to me that each club, or the majority of clubs, and I would suggest particularly the Melbourne-based clubs, are putting a lot of eggs in one basket salary-wise. And I don't know whether that's a professional way to run an organisation. You're leaving yourself quite exposed, don't you?
Yeah, I've often thought about this, Fiend, and I think you're onto something there because, for example, Grundy's the latest one. He's got a 7-year contract, and they're talking about he's possibly getting 1.3 million a year. He's a very good player, and I'm not saying he's not worth a lot of money.
But he's not actually listed. He's not actually listed,
isn't he?
No. You've got surprisingly Jeremy McGovern at West Coast.
That surprised me.
Yeah, Jeremy Cameron at GWS and Lance Franklin at Sydney. Do you think McGovern from West Coast might have been offsetting him wanting to play with his brother? Anyway, and then you've got Josh Kelly from the Giants. So that's 2 Giants on $1 million or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Pendlebury.
And they get subsidy.
Yeah, Pendlebury at Collingwood, which surprised me. Dangerfield, which also surprised me a bit considering he left us for $650.
Yeah, of course.
And the promise that it was going to come up.
Yeah, Bontempelli at the Dogs, another Eagle, Andrew Gaff, so there's 2 Eagles, and Patrick Cripps at Carlton. And you've also got Polek that is on a front-ended deal, which gets him up there, and Tommy Mitchell. It doesn't include Tom Boyd, who is negotiating an exit package or has negotiated an exit package. So... Grundy isn't in that conversation.
See, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, I've always thought that...
notwithstanding that's 2000... Sorry, I must qualify that, Mac. Sorry to interrupt. That's 2019 numbers. So you're probably right that Grundy's now in that conversation for next year's figures.
I think he would be. We've got a salary cap for the group as a whole, and I wouldn't be against the AFL putting a individual salary cap inside teams. In other words, you can't pay on the amount of money you've got. You can't pay a top player more than say $1 million to get it, because actually a team is made up of a lot of players, and that one player can't win games on their own. And I know that they can be. Sometimes the difference between winning and losing in very tight games. But by the same token, I really do think it, and I know it happens in all sports, it's very elitist, and I wouldn't be, for example, and I'm not saying not to pay them well, but I wouldn't mind seeing a salary cap put on, say, at $1 million, no more for any individual player, to make sure that some of the others that sweat their guts out and and play every week, and they're only getting perhaps 250 or 300, perhaps get a little bit more.
I'm a little bit different than that, Mac. I don't disagree in principle, but what I would like to see is maybe some tiers. So some caps, like a certain amount of players need to be within a certain salary range. If that's
probably where I'm going to. That's probably where I'm going to.
Percentage.
Yeah, 50% need to be above 300,000 or something like that. Because the problem is that, and there's, I was having a conversation at work today with a Port supporter, and we're talking about junior development and how the system really chews up young kids and spits them out. We've got a lot of players devoting a stupid amount of time to make it into the AFL system that are not going to earn enough money to justify, the commitment for 3 or 4 years and then getting turfed out onto the streets, basically, with not a lot of life skill or other skills. And to me, I think the salary cap was put in place in order to limit teams' ability to gain an advantage because of the checkbook. And yet, I think where we've got to now with the salary cap is that it's been manipulated to such a degree, and it's just capitalism again in a microcosm. Most of the money is going to a very few amount of players, and the rest of the players are playing for comparative peanuts to make up the team. You look at a guy like Jared Lyons, who was offered, reportedly offered $150,000 to stay at Adelaide.
Yeah, that's insulting.
Now, all right, it might have been a strategy to get him to nick off somewhere else because
which it was, obviously.
The Crows didn't want him around. But the simple fact of the matter, he's turned into a bona fide midfielder in the AFL system with Brisbane. Now, I don't think it's fair that a bloke like Jared Lyons or the many other players of similar ilk to him are disadvantaged because a club wants to pay exorbitant amounts of money for a quote-unquote star. It's not a fair system, and there's a lot of commitment that these kids and these young men have to put in to get into the system and then stay in the system. And you've got, the unknown factors of injury and form. And because we're drafting them at such a young age, they don't have an opportunity to actually develop other skills and gain other training and all the rest of it. So they're in the system until, if they don't make it successfully, they're in the system until 21, 22, 23 years of age. And they exit the system with not a huge amount of money and nothing really to show for it and having to start again. And in the meantime, you've got the Dusty Martins of the world earning $1 million. And I think there needs to be some equity reintroduced into the system to help the lesser lights of the system make professional football a viable proposition for them.
I disagree with that. And one example, very good example within our club again, is Cam Ellis-Yeoman, who's kept on a rookie list for ages. And yet in the last year playing for us, when he had those 8 good games in a row, he's getting paid rookie wages. Now, maybe a bit more than rookie wages, but he's getting paid peanuts when he was in our very best players for 8 weeks in a row. And I do understand, look, Paul C is saying it's the same in every sport and that people are there to see the stars, not the others. But that isn't quite true because they're there to see the team because and yes, they do want to see the individual, but the individual can't do it on their own. There is a team.
Well, look, and it's not a direct comparison. You got Jared Haynes went over to sign on to a practice squad with the San Francisco 49ers and earn $1 million US, and played 3 games of gridiron. It's not the same. The lower lights in those big professional competitions like the NBA and the NFL and the Major League Soccer and English Premier League and all those professional leagues are on a hell of a lot higher base salary than what a first, second, third year AFL footballer is. So, yes, it is the same in terms of the disparity, but there's not enough money in AFL football to sustain more than the top, 30%, judging by those payment numbers, the top 30% of players. And that was a situation that the salary cap was trying to address, and I think it needs to be rejigged.
And just because it's that's the same way it is all over the world, but we've identified it's an issue. So just because it's being done doesn't mean we can't look at it and try and get it changed.
Yeah, I like the tier system.
Yeah, I think like a tier system that you have to have a certain number of players, a percentage of players in this salary bracket, and this salary bracket, and this salary bracket.
Yeah,
would be a lot fairer. The problem is a couple of those players that you named, they're the ones that sit on the AFLPA.
Yeah, and
are they going to be willing to take a pay cut?
Well, and
of course not.
But AFLPA represent the entire AFL players, the whole group. So they don't just I know, they don't just represent Dustin Martin. They also represent, Will Hamill, second year Crows player. And the problem is, the more they bump up the minimum wage through the CBA, all it's doing is making that situation worse, because they're not taking from the top tier players to fund the increase in the minimum wage. They're actually taking from the middle tier. So, your middle tier players are going to get less of a rise. And I think it's why we see a fair bit of player movement. Like, you look at the Crows situation. We had Jake Lever on reasonable coin, but because of his value perceived value in the market, he was able to ask for an amount of money that Adelaide just could not match, because of the fact that he was going to go into that top bracket of earners. Mitch McGovern was the same. He was he was asking for an amount of money that far exceeded his value, simply because he was able to, and all it takes is another team to have room at that middle to top tier, and they can take a bloke like Mitch McGovern. And what it does then, you've got a whole bunch of players that have moved who are in that, 600 to 800,000, who really don't deserve it. And you've got blokes that are more loyal and have better service and better output in terms of their football career, that aren't earning that amount of money because they've never moved, and so they've never had the same leverage. You can't tell me that Jake Lever or Mitch McGovern deserve the money that they're currently on, and yet they were able to extract that because of the way that salary cap is unregulated in terms of how money is spent. So I think it needs looking at. It doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
I'm in the same camp as you, but there'll be others that say we're wrong. But anyhow, I'm with you.
All right, we need to move on. Oh, sorry, last comment, Nick.
Just very quickly, that a couple of years ago, Sloaney actually did bring up, because that's when money was being thrown at him to go back to St Kilda, etc. And he said, look, why can't we have something that for a player to be loyal to a club, to stay with the club, to get a bonus?
I like that.
And of course, everybody poo-pooed that down, but I think that actually has a little bit of merit.
Well, I think loyalty needs to come back into it. I think there needs, at the moment, unless your team is dead set in the middle of a premiership window, if you're a star player, there is absolutely no incentive for you to stay at that club financially. You look at Sloaney now. There's a fair chance, unfortunately, that he will not be around by the time our squad rematures and gets itself ready for a premiership tilt. But he's chosen to stay around, and some will say, well, he's made that lifestyle choice, whatever. That doesn't make any difference. The simple fact is, it's a gain. Mitch McGovern gets rewarded for moving and gets a salary that he probably doesn't deserve. Rory Sloane, who's 10 times the player Mitch McGovern is probably on a similar amount of money for staying and sees no benefit from it. That's a really good example, Nick, of where the disparity is, I think. Anyway, look, let's move on. Some other AFL news. Brisbane have got themselves an Irishman.
Have they?
Yeah, they didn't get the one that we wanted, but they got themselves a European. He is an Irishman, but he came out of the European Combine. He was born in Lithuania.
God, yeah.
And he's been in Ireland since age 4, and apparently he's lightning quick.
Irish.
Apparently he's lightning quick.
Yeah, well, that's one of the beauties of the players in general from Ireland. They're quick.
Well, he hasn't come through the Gaelic system. He went to the European Combine.
So what's his sporting background, I wonder?
Let me see if I can.
He must have a ball sport of some description.
No, I can't read it quickly. I won't waste time. There's an article on the AFL website if people want to have a look. So anyway, he's going to be a Category A rookie for Brisbane.
Category B?
Category A, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know. What else is there? There's not a lot else.
State of origin? The alleged state of origin, which isn't really.
It's not really state of origin.
I was going to get to that at the end, Mac.
Okay.
We'll talk about that in a little minute. Tom Brown came out today and said that Richmond were hunting Darcy Moore. Tom Brown, in my opinion, and I don't know how you guys think, but I think Tom Brown should have his bloody media licence taken away from him. He's the biggest muckraker since bloody that other toss. What was his name?
Oh,
you know who I'm talking about.
McClure.
Sam McClure.
Yeah. Like, we're at the beginning of the season, and he's basically made this nothing statement that Richmond would love to have Darcy Moore on their list, and Damien Hardwick would love to coach Darcy Moore, and all of a sudden that's now on. You know, I wish that the AFL media would just back the hell out and start, you know, placing a little bit of emphasis on facts. And of course, Eddie Maguire's come out.
Yeah, but there's no fun.
It's getting a bit tiresome though, Nick. Don't you think?
It does.
But and this is what gets me is they do this every pre-season. They are looking to the following year. They really start pushing who they're going to get at the end of the trade. They've already even the AFL website has even had articles up on who's coming out of contract this year. The season hasn't even started. Yeah. To me, what it smacks of is that they can't actually go and do journalism.
Well, and that there's not enough news for them to fill the cycle. And the thing is, again, I get back to the way we're treating our players. And mental health is such a big issue these days, right? And the AFL reckon they're committed to open discourse around mental health and looking after players and whatnot. And yet the media scrutiny on a kid like Darcy Moore, who is already from a family that suffered through great controversy when his old man went to bloody Melbourne back in the day, in the 70s, right? Here's a kid who wants to sign another deal with Collingwood, is in his last year of his contract. Some idiot from the media puts like 2 and 2 together and comes up with 6 just because Richmond have lost Rance. He's gone around looking, going, who would be a good fill for Rance's spot? Darcy Moore's out of contract. Let's make that a big issue, right?
And never mind that they actually played quite well without Rance.
Well, the bottom line is, Nick, that it puts pressure on Darcy Moore now. He's got to deal with that scrutiny. He's got to deal with these issues. Now, if you're a parent of a 22, 23, even 25-year-old, you can't tell me that you think that your kids would be equipped to deal with the amount of national media scrutiny that Darcy Moore's going to be under now, and that Brodie Grundy was under last year, etc., etc., etc. And I just think it's time that the AFL media circus backed off these kids a little bit. And I also think that you're talking about the Players Association before, Nick. This is exactly where the Players Association need to get involved, because they're supposed to not only look after the financial interests of their playing group, but also the emotional and physical health of their playing group. And I don't think they're fulfilling their charter at the moment, do you?
No. And I don't think they have for a very long time. I've been quite scathing regarding them. They seem to protect a certain amount of players, but not all of the players.
They do it when it's evident. When a player comes out and says I'm having a break because of mental health issues, that's when they back off and they wrap their arms around them and all the rest of it. But the problem is that half the time it's the media that's contributed to that situation in the first place. So there's a real double standard there. And look, I'll freely admit that this podcast at times has probably contributed to that. And it's a promise that I'm going to make to our listeners going forward, having thought about it over the off-season, that we need to and we're an Adelaide Crows podcast, but we need to wrap our arms around the Adelaide Crows players. And the last thing that I want this podcast to be is a source of anxiety, even though we've got, bugger all coverage compared to the big media outlets. I'd rather we just didn't contribute to all that.
Yeah, well, and it's
I agree with you, but in a way, sometimes you have to, in the sense that when you're talking about a player getting well beaten by his opponent, so you can't avoid saying the truth in those situations.
Yeah, but that's different, Macca. That's analysis.
It's how you say it, Macca, though. It's that for some people, they will do it by quite personally attacking instead of talking about the effect of what they did and how they can improve.
Okay.
And I think it comes back down to a lot of people not having a coaching background and not knowing the positive, negative, positive mantra.
And, let's have a look at a guy like David McKay, who's an absolute whipping boy for the Adelaide Crows, and
unfairly treated.
Well, unfairly treated in a personal sense. I think the analysis of David's game has been valid. My personal view is that I don't think that he should be first 22 for the Adelaide Crows. But do I think he's a bad fella? No. He's a lovely fella. We've had him on this podcast. It's probably still our highest rated player interview, which tells you something about, the the manner in which the Adelaide Crows fans think about David. But the simple factor is that we need to eliminate some of the rhetoric around how we analyse his game. Instead of saying David McKay is shit, we need to say David McKay.
Well, I've never said that. So
No.
But I'm with you on. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to go on Big Footy to see some of the rambling rhetoric about certain players and coaches and individuals. And the simple fact is that there's ways to analyse a player's game without tearing them down on a personal level. And I'm sure if people trawled back through our episodes, I'm sure they can find many examples where we've crossed that line, and that's fine. And I'm sure we'd all put our hand up and say, in retrospect, that's not the right thing to do. And I think, as a podcast, I think we need to make a commitment to. We've always been analytical. We've never pulled punches, and I don't think anyone has ever done this on purpose. But I think we have to make a special effort to keep our analysis to the game and try and keep the rhetoric to a minimum, because getting back to the point, I think the media are putting these kids under enough pressure as it is.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, and I'm happy to go along with what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's not a comment. It wasn't supposed to be a big statement. I think I read McClure and Tom Brown and these blokes, these muckrakers, Hutchinson and that, and I just get tired of it. And I think, well, my son is the same age as Brodie Grundy, and if he was in the AFL system, I know that it would have a massive impact on his life. And that's not something as a parent that I'd want for my 25-year-old son. So if I wouldn't want it for my kid, why would I want it for anyone else's kids?
You also agree with Vardy Magic with his comment about can't be sycophantic, though. In other words, we can't avoid telling the truth at times, but what you're saying is don't embellish it with personal insults.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, Macca. I don't think we'll ever be sycophants. One of the things that we pride ourselves on as a podcast, and this will be the last on it. One of the things we like about doing the podcast is that we're not apricot slicers, we're not Chardonnay sippers. When the Crows are doing well, we're all about it. When the Crows are doing badly, we're all about it, and that's been shown over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of what we've said about how the Crows have been over the last couple of years has been vindicated by what happened in the off-season. But I think there's a way of doing it, and there's a way of doing it that is focused on the sport and not on the individual. So I think we need to take that mantra, Macca, play the ball, not the man. You reckon?
100%.
Beautiful.
Yep, 100%.
Right. Let's move on.
Just one last point on that Lions guy. He is a goalkeeper in Gaelic football, and they tested him. His yo-yo test is higher than anybody that tested here in Australia. And he also is a speed machine as well. So if they can teach him to play footy, he's got to be a damn good player.
Yeah, good score. All right, let's move on to the women's match on the weekend, shall we? We got up in the end, Nick, but it wasn't easy.
It was, yeah. Well, it wasn't. Now, last week, you two were like, oh, we're going to smash them. And I was the one that said, no, this is the type of team that will worry us. I was right.
I actually said we should smash them.
We should smash them if we had more of those players in. they are the type of team that worries us. I really like the way that St Kilda plays. Peter Searle, the way she's picked that team, the types of players that she's picked, I think they're going to be a great side to watch. They're going to get a win soon. They play very fast football, but it's with a lot of skill. They've got some great kicks in the team. They've got a lot of speed, and they use that to really good advantage in the first half. We kind of, a little bit like last week, we were slow to start. We were backing away a little bit. The second half, it was like it had kind of been, the switch had been flicked on, or at the ground. It was like, well, they got yelled at halftime. And basically what it was Clarkey was essentially saying, we need to get in their face and we need to get our tackle count up and our pressure up. And as soon as they started to do that in the third quarter, we saw St Kilda not be able to get that run on game. There was still little bits of moments, but I also thought they started to tire.
Well, I think we about 6 minutes before half time, Nick, we started to put, our players finally started to put some pressure on them.
Yes.
Our disposal was disgraceful up till then. And on top of that, as you said before we went on air, the damn forwards were right out of position all the time and going up too high, and we'd kick down there'd be nobody there. And then even then, if there was, the contest wasn't hard enough. And Elise Jones, and this is not being personal, but she had one of her worst games ever in the first half. She did a couple of good things in the second half, but she is a good player, but she didn't play as one in the first half. And the ball was in her direction quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's what I talked about last week. She was still doing it again, which is she starts from behind her opponent. She lets her opponent get in front of her. It was a windy game. So last week we didn't know how to play wet weather football. This week we didn't know how to play football with wind. It was just like, oh my God. It was very frustrating at the ground watching it, because we could see how St Kilda had set up. They'd set up so well behind the ball, and they were getting their numbers back. They always had an extra player in defence, and Clark was happy for that to happen, but our players weren't smart enough to kick to the spaces, or where we did get some of those plays, and it generally involved Maddie Newman. She is a fantastic kick. It's very interesting. She was like a pick in the 90s in the draft. Yes, it is compromised. She could only come to us, but I think she might end up being probably our best player from this draft, even though there's players like Montana McKinnon, etc.
Oh, she played very well, Nick.
Yes, she did. And she's got a beautiful, beautiful kick on her. So I think it was kind of funny on the telecast that Peter Searle was reported as saying, oh, you know, we've got them at 3/4 time. Let's run over the top of them. It's like, have you met the Adelaide side? That doesn't happen. I think we still are quite a fit team. And that did show. St Kilda tired. They couldn't stick to their defensive structures. They also lost one of their key defenders. Courageous going back with a flight of the ball, but it was a tough hit, and she got the double whammy with the hit on the ground with her head, so she had to go off. But I think the move of Courtney Gumm into the midfield or on the wing a little bit in the second quarter started to stem the tide. Renee Forth was put on the wing, so those two mature heads worked really well. Ange Foley had a horrible game last week, but she was back to doing what I wanted her to do in the absence of Randall. She was a bit more of that intercepting player and reading the ball a lot better across that half back line. That's what we're going to need from her every game. They put a really strong tag on Hatchard, so she couldn't get her kicks away. So she did a lot more handballs this week, but they were still fairly proactive. And Marinoff, it was kind of interesting at the game because she still has a problem with that kick of hers, that it's just the dump kick and it's going to go up in the air and cause a bit of problems. But she did get the 10 votes from the coaches, and rewatching the game, I could just see how much she was actually coaching on the ground and helping the other players.
The second half was very good, Nick, and
it was.
And her disposal was one of the reasons in the second half was one of the reasons why we did improve, because she did the dump kick in the first half virtually every time, but I did like her disposal a lot better, kick to position or to a person in the second half, and I thought that she was one of the reasons we got right back in the game. And of course, Gum was an absolute ripper, and she really played a top second half, and they were the two people that got us over the line, really.
So yeah. I've heard you mention again, and from the reports that I've read, again, we seem to be second to the ball early.
Yep.
That's 2 weeks in a row. Because Brisbane, certainly I felt we were hesitant at the contest. Now, is that a little bit of a premiership hangover, do you think?
No, lack of leadership.
I don't think it's
leadership,
the
mate.
younger players.
Do you think it's... Yeah, no, but we've got experienced players around the ball. Marinoff and Hatchard are experienced players. To me, you just get 1% off the boil after you've won a flag sometimes. I just wonder whether we've been a little bit off the boil.
In the centre, we're actually not doing bad. It's once it gets out of that area where there are more of the younger players getting involved in the back line, or those half-backs and the half-forwards coming up around the ball and not quite getting to the position they are. They're a little bit hesitant. Nawa Allen, I've seen her play some SANFL games, and she was looking a little bit hesitant, and I know she can play so much better than that. So I do think it is still a little bit of nerves, and I think it is quite a jump up from the speed they're used to at the SANFLW to this AFLW. So like you said at our first cast for the year, we've got such a young team. We have so many injuries. It's going to be a bit tough for us, but if we can scrape out those wins, it's going to help us once we start getting those other players back. So Metcalf is actually back joining in quite a few drills, and so is Phillips. They might not be ready this week, but I think they're close, which is quite good. I just wish that every journalist would stop asking as their first question out their mouth to any Crows AFLW player, so is Aaron back next week? So actually talk about them might be nice. So I think it's right. But also, if you look back to our season last year, we always often let teams get the jump on us in the first quarter. So I don't think it's actually a premiership hangover thing. I think it's actually just it takes us a little time to get into a game, and Clarkie's still working on getting them to flick that switch, because once they do, then they're actually quite unstoppable.
I think that there are three things at the moment that are different from the Crows of last year. First of all is that intensity at the contest. Second of all, we don't seem to be clean at ground level. And third, we lack a target up forward. Well,
yes, we do. And, we're really missing somebody like an Aaron Phillips up there. Young Gould, who took that absolute beautiful mark in the last quarter. That was the first game, wasn't it, Nick? And,
it was indeed.
And I think that once she gets over nerves and that, she could be a very handy target. But make sure she stays in the square, because that will absolutely put panic in their hearts.
And they've talked about it before. They said, she literally just marks anything that comes her way. There were a couple she didn't quite club, but she was still getting her hands to and bringing it down. But if anybody hasn't watched the game, go and watch the second half, and particularly watch young Madison Newman and some of the things that she did. She is an incredibly clever player. She's one of those young ones who actually seems to have gotten up to the speed of the game very quickly. There are a couple of times she could see a defender in front of her raising the arms, and she does a low kick. So it goes under them and gets to our player that's actually leading towards the ball in the forward lines and creating a contest and moving the ball forward. So I think she's quite a highlight. It's going to be interesting this week coming up. We're up against Geelong down at Cardinia Park, but they haven't won there yet. They actually haven't won a game.
It's not the graveyard. It's a shitty time, though. Again, 4:40 on a Sunday. Oh my God.
It's horrible time.
I mean, come on. Seriously. Anyway, look, we're going to have to leave it there for the AFLW. But look, it was good to see the girls get back on track.
There was just one thing in the AFLW which I thought was hilarious, was after the Collingwood-Carlton game, they were interviewing, I think it's Livingston, who was the defender who played on Taylor Harris and played on her quite well. And the quote they've only taken one word out of the quote where they just said she called her useless. No, she said once you take out her aerial game, she's useless on the ground.
All right,
and that is so true of Taylor Harris, and I love the fact that we got a player actually being quite honest.
That's enough. All right, now Macca, onto the serious stuff.
yeah. I'm with you.
No, I didn't say that. Pre-season starts. Thank God for that. 2 rounds of the Marsh Community Series, punctuated by that pseudo State of Origin charity match, which is a very good cause, but it's not State of Origin, that's for sure. And we got Melbourne at Casey Fields on Saturday.
Yeah, where's Casey Fields? I've never heard of Casey.
Remember how they moved Seaford or wherever it is out there?
It is absolutely horrible out in the sticks of Melbourne. In order for people to get there, you literally have to catch 2 trains and 2 buses if you're catching by public transport. It is an incredibly windy ground. They've played a lot of AFLW games out there. I think most players hate it or the spectators hate it. But, for some reason, we keep getting games out there. It's a shithole.
Yeah, it's not the best. I think Melbourne moved their training ground out there and then they decided against it after all. Well, they don't like it anyway. A couple of things on the Crows front. Riley Knight's got an Achilles injury, which is not good news for Riley because they can be a pain in the ass to get out of. And
he always has to have an injury in pre-season.
Yeah, look, it's a big season for Riley in my opinion, and it's not a good start for him. An Achilles will take him out for 6 weeks, and it could actually hamper him all season. Having done an Achilles myself, I know that once you've got them, they're hard to get over. I mean,
could be bad news for him though, Fiend, because he was the very last player they signed up.
Well, so yes, that's what I mean. He's it's not the start he would have wanted. Hopefully, it's not major, because he would be wanting to stick his hands up. They're saying 3 to 4 weeks, but that's just competitive loads. Look, they're just a bitch. I mean, remember Van Berlo? Obviously his was a rupture.
That was a nasty one.
So it was a lot worse. But that was him done. That was him done. So not good news for Riley Knight at all, and we do wish him all the best. Ned McHenry is not going to be considered this weekend either. I don't think.
Is that fact? Well, he's got a knock to the stomach or something, a knee to the stomach or something like that, and depends how he pulls up, which means he may well be unlikely. And Duday is definitely not playing. He'll be playing next week.
Yeah, they can take as long as they like with time, in my opinion. This is not a season to be rushing players back.
No.
But they did say my mate Hardigan is likely to be available.
Yep. They made sure that there was a little something on social media today of him moving nice and freely at training.
God,
I thought of you when I saw it.
I know. They've always got to have something for me. Mackesy, though, I'm really hoping. He's been going very, very well, apparently, in their little private sessions, and he'll be very interesting to watch because they reckon he's a really good chance to be in the opening round. So, I think they've got a real beauty in this boy. They keep raving about him.
Yeah, and I watched Jordan Butts last year in the SNFL, and I think he's also another really nice talent, but he's still a slight frame, whereas Fisher is already
he's ready
bigger,
to go.
Than him. So I think he is ready to go. So as much as it's a pity that even though Jordan's been in the system for a year, he was a rookie pickup, he is still rookie. I think we've got some 2 very nice key position players there, and there's also Josh Worrell.
Yeah,
I think he's going to be a gun in time because he's a very athletic type, and he's 195 centimetres, and he can play back, forward, on ball, wherever. So just give him time to develop, and maybe not this year, but next year he could be a very likely player for us.
Yep. Look, it's a bit of a nothing game, of course, but it's good to get everyone on the park. It'll be interesting to see how the Crows look under a new coaching regime. and hopefully they give the young lads a bit of a run. What are they running? What are they running? 25, 24? Do we know?
I think it's
Yeah, I think they run the extra one, don't they?
27, isn't it? It's. I think it might be. I'm not sure, but I think they could go up to about 27 players or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
They did last year, but certainly at least 25. Oh yeah, was 25 because they used to name 28, then cut 3.
Cut 3. Yep. That's what I thought. So it'll be good. You'd expect there'd be some young lads running around. It'll be good to see how Chase Jones fronts up and where they stick him. It'll be very interesting to see. Well, let's hope so. I really hope they don't use him as a small forward. Just stick him in the guts and let the kid develop.
That's been playing all his time there.
Yeah, in the internal trial, they played him in the midfield.
Yep.
He was solidly in the midfield. He wasn't up forward.
Let's hope that continues.
I see that DSG said he hates the Mars series and they keep wondering why they play him. Well, as a person who barracks for his team and wants to see what's coming up, I love the Mars series because you see the young lads get a go, and also being a dream teamer from way back and a very successful one. This is where you get a lot of information.
It exposes a bit of form, doesn't it? Especially on the young
it
lads.
Does. To me, dream team, it's the most important games of the year.
And look, Macca, there's not many things that I can give you commendation about, but Dream Team is one of them. You got the runs on the board there, so we bow to your let's not call it luck in Dream Team.
Netted $2,500 last year.
Yeah, so the forward line is where I'm most interested. As I mentioned last week, it's going to be really interesting to see how they use Das and Tex and how much of a run Benny Davis gets, how they use the tools in Himmelberg, and just how they structure up. Whether I'm sure Nix will probably run a couple of looks during the course of the match. We'll probably go small and tall at various stages. We've got Frampton to look at as well, so it's going to be quite interesting.
I reckon he'll try in one game, probably 2 or 3 different setups.
I would think
trying to work out which is the better one, because the end result doesn't really matter in these games. What really matters is you get a look at your players and you get a look to see where control players in different positions than they normally play, and you get a look at the players who haven't been in the side before to see where they're going to cut the mustard. I love these matches.
Yep.
And I think what we've traditionally done, us as Adelaide, is we've played a lot more of the kids in the first game.
Correct, Nick.
And then we get more closer to the settled round one side in the second game. There was one person who was able to sneak through the construction zone and give a sneaky little bit of a recap on some of the trial game, not just from what the club put out, which was fabulous. Oh, aren't we doing fabulous in team first? Was that they noticed that there was a lot of the midfielders weren't just playing in the typical midfield. They were pushed on the outside as a lot of rotation through the wings. And I did see that somebody else pointed out that that's a very GWS thing that they did in the way they
very
played
much so.
year.
Very much
so.
so.
I think we're going to get a very similar game style to that.
I think we'll get elements of GWS. I don't think we have the same squad.
What we can.
But I like that because it's going to force blokes like Rory Atkins to be much more accountable.
Yes.
And it will expose his form. If Rory doesn't get more of his own ball, he's going to be struggling, I think, this year. So anyway, look, we need to finish up because we've already gone over my preconceived time idea. But the last thing that I just want to touch on in regards to pre-season is we've got 4 blokes in that State of Origin game that's going to be held on the 28th. So would you be holding Sloaney, Lairdy, Smith and Tex aside after the first half this weekend?
Yeah, probably. You'd probably you'd want them to have a reasonable run. You'd probably give them a 2/3 of a run or something like that. But you'd want to get a little bit under their belt.
Well, they're all senior players, so fitness isn't really an issue. They've got a good fitness base. You want to be careful with loads on blokes like Brodie Smith who's done a knee. So you want to be careful with a bloke like that. Sloaney's a warhorse, but he carries injuries. He's got his shoulder and foot and a couple of other things, so you don't want to overwork him. I know it's only going to be a bit of an exhibition game, but I guess we need to be careful.
But it's still It's still big. He's being played at the Docklands, which is a horrible stadium on those type of injuries anyhow because of the concrete base.
Oh, the hardness.
Lairdy's presser today, they asked about it, and he said, we've got to have a chat with Haas, meaning Matt Haas, about our loads, about what we're going to be doing this week and next week leading into that game.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely yes, they do want to play because of the cause and what it is for.
Of course.
But I think we're being quite realistic and already thinking about what we need to do for them. So it could be that we have two of those that sit out the first half and play in the second half and vice versa.
Interesting thing, isn't it? It's a silly little thing. We've got two Rorys in the squads. Are there any other Rorys in any other team?
Macca, do you know at 56 minutes into the podcast, the one thing that you said that was correct is that it's a silly little thing. So,
oh, yeah, I can see.
Jeez, my God. Anyway,
I'm just thinking about it.
Yeah,
we've got 3/4 of the Rorys.
Discuss it with Mrs. Mack during the course of the week. I'm sure she'll slap you around as well. In the meantime, that's it for this week. Thanks everyone on Spreaker, Facebook and YouTube for joining us. The chat on Spreaker is always great. We'll be back next Tuesday for pre-season episode 4. I think do you feel like we're starting to shake the cobwebs out now, Nikki?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. There will be some changes leading into the main season. We'll probably schedule a press conference in a couple of weeks' time just to announce those changes, Macca. But until then, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Macca and Nikki, for your presence and input tonight, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Enjoyed it myself. Good night, all.
Night, all.